guys, my name is Mimi and I just did part 1 of the James Bond style analysis series. Listen to all about part 1 and then come back here and listen to this. I'm treating this as more of a podcast since it is a lot of information because there's over a dozen films in the James Bond franchise. And subscribe so you don't miss part 3. Without further ado, let's get into it. So after Lazenby left, Sean Connery actually came back for Diamonds Are Forever. With his return, Anthony Sinclair was re-employed as the tailor for the suits, and Sinclair's suits were similar to the ones that he did previously, though now it's actually a bigger size of suit because Connery actually started packing on some muffins. This shows a return to the restraint of the earlier films, although styles had changed in the 9 years since Dr. No, and there's no Windsor knot on the ties, or pocket handkerchief, and there's a widening of the pocket flaps and lapels. The jacket button is also positioned at a lower stance on his suits because this is supposed to make his physique look thinner and a more narrow point where the suit button is, and it makes his physique look more athletic rather than V-shaped. The jacket in the film also includes much deeper vents in the back. So vents are like basically cut openings in the back of like a suit jacket or a blazer. You can have a single vent, which is one single cut in the center, or you can have double vents, which are 2 on the side of the back. And that's a double vent. Something I didn't know before researching this, because I'm not super steep into menswear. And this is supposed to be another technique to make Connery seem slimmer on screen. Spazer also points out that this is the first Bond film to include a cummerbund with a dinner jacket, and in Diamonds Are Forever it is used as a plot device because it is actually used as a harness when he breaks into Willard White's apartment. As for one of the Bond girls, after the red-haired St. John was confirmed as being cast on March 3rd, 1971, the later script places the colored wigs in the order that would be viewed in the film: platinum blonde, brunette, and red, to reflect St. John's natural hair color. The wigs were provided by St. John, who had a line of wig creations being sold in America at the time, which is interesting. The dialogue in the script also recalls this. Bond: I tend to notice little things like that, whether a girl's a blonde or a brunette. Tiffany:
And which do you prefer?
Bond: provided the collars and cuffs match. Joyce Haber believed that, quote, the costumer and location seemed eminently suitable for a playgirl like Jill. Donfeld, who became a costume designer in the early 1960s, was the second highest paid freelancer designer in Hollywood by 1970 by the time Irene Schaff had come along. Compared to a Hollywood studio costume designer's salary at the time ranging from $450 to $750 a week, Donfeld commanded $1,000 a week, so 25% more than even $750 a week. Donfeld was very outspoken on the way he approached costume designing, explaining that on an actress's views relating to their costumes. That, quote, I want her to feel good in her clothes. I take this into consideration if they are self-conscious about anything, but the actress should never inflict her opinion on the designer. Costumes must move and flow in harmony with the sets, scripts, and character to be enacted. To achieve this is a designer's job, not that of the actress. End quote. Donfeld also decided that Tiffany's sheer black negligee was supposed to be something short and see-through, as required by the script. And the design for this costume, one of 4 that survived with each painted in a medium of watercolor and gouache, is typical of Donfeld's unique and distinctive renderings, including a sketchy, stylized, elongated female form. In this design, it is evident that Donfeld was heavily influenced by Yves Saint Laurent, YSL, and their dress designed for the 1968 Rive Gauche ready-to-wear label. The negligee has a low V-shaped plunging neckline that is cut to the navel or belly, and it actually flares out slightly from the one button fastening. It includes a wide black band made from satin silk around the hem, which is cut to the upper thigh. The long flowing angel sleeves also include a matching band around the cuffs and an ironic interpretation of Bond's line that is delivered to Tiffany, provided that the collars and cuffs match. And it does! With the return of Connery in his Sinclair-clad tailored suits, we also start to see Blofeld wearing the Mao suit again, and as we know, that is the stereotype for Bond villains. However, unlike You Only Live Twice, when the Mao used as like a visual signifier of Spectre's support for the People's Republic of China, the Mao suit here is not actually reflective of the film's plot in Diamonds Are Forever. For Gray's Blofeld, the suit is similarly cut to Pleasance, however with a key difference. Gray's includes 4 pockets instead of 2. This is ironic given the nature of what the pockets represent on the Chinese version of the suit, namely the 4 cardinal principles: propriety, justice, honesty, and shame, and the opposite of what Blofeld's character represents in Bond's films. To allow the viewers to differentiate between the 2 Blofeld suits used in one of the scenes, their mouse suits differ slightly in color. The real Blofeld suit is a gray version, and then the fake Blofeld in the scene is wearing a brown khaki version. Interestingly, the other scenes which involve Blofeld in this suit, he's wearing the brown khaki version of the suit. So it's kind of not consistent, because if he was the real one, he should be wearing the gray. And in the early version of the script, the secondary character Plenty O'Toole, aka actress Lana Wood. I gotta also comment too that all these names are just terrible. Plenty O'Toole. What kind of name is that? O'Toole sounds like kind of Irish. Who names their kid Plenty? But she is described as a Hugh Hefner dream come true, with a sweet face towering over other ladies like a colossus. Well, that was a description. The colossus description was later dropped in later script revisions following the casting of Wood, who was 5'2" tall, and then due to her height, the actress had to stand on a wooden box on the casino scene when standing next to Connery. And in the bedroom scene between the pair, she was provided with extremely high-heeled shoes in order to reduce their height difference. Basically stripper heels. The shoes, made from purple satin, were 3-inch court heels and have silver-colored soles. And in the script, but especially the film, the only purpose of her character was for Bond to use her name as a pun. Here are the punchlines in the script. O'Toole.
Hi, I'm Plenty.
Bond.
But of course.
She says,
Plenty O'Toole.
Bond. Named after your father, perhaps?
and it's like, ugh. Obviously, they named her such a ridiculous name so they could do that stupid line. Kind of punny, though. I do appreciate their sense of humor with the puns. On her death, Plenty is wearing a sexualized version of Ophelia's dress, as depicted in John Everett's Malaise painting Ophelia, which is ironic given that she was tied to a concrete slab. So after Diamonds Are Forever, Connery hung up his James Bond suits again for the second time, and this is forever now. So from this point, we dive into the era of Roger Moore as 007. And Roger Moore is perhaps the most fashionable of all the James Bond men. He has his own tailor that he wants, and he started with Live and Let Die. Out of all the actors to be cast in the role of Bond, Moore was the most fashion conscious and demonstrated a genuine interest in the menswear industry beyond modeling knitwear prior to his acting career. This is evident in the Bond films because he would have 3 tailors providing his suits: Cyril Castell, Angelo Viducci, and Douglas Hayward. Hayward is actually quite of note. But Moore's interest in fashion is notable because in the credit he was afforded in Persuaders, Lord Sinclair's, quote, clothes designed by Roger Moore, accompanied by a copy of Roger Moore's signature. Moore's interest in fashion is particularly evident in the credit he was afforded in the Persuaders. Lord Sinclair's clothes designed by Roger Moore, accompanied by a copy of Roger Moore's signature in large print. This was for 2 reasons. The first being Moore's insistent that his tailor at the time, Castell, makes his suits for the series, and because of his involvement with the Bradford-based worsted textile manufacturing firm Pearson & Foster Ltd., which provided the cloth for his suits. It was agreed that Moore would make a significant contribution to the designing and marketing of a Roger Moore collection, rather than his name merely being attached as a gimmick or a labeling operation. Due to Moore's enthusiasm for fashion and design, Wilkinson soon arranged for the actor to become involved in designing a collection of Terry Lynn clothing as part of the Roger Moore collection, noting in a company proposal that Moore has to be extremely fashion conscious and is always on the lookout for new ideas in men's clothing for his screen roles, end quote, translating fashion ideas in his own style. After Moore's appointment to the board of directors, Pearson & Foster, one of the events he attended was the British Menswear Guild Conference on October 10th, 1970. Liz Gill reported that Moore had been loaned from Pearson & Foster in order to promote the guild, of which Pearson & Foster were directly connected through providing cloth to some of its members. The film arranged for Moore to attend the conference via its private plane, a 4-seater Cessna. So very fancy in my class. The actor was specifically employed to promote the Windsor look fashion made famous by Edward, Prince of Wales in 1924. On Moore's modified suit depicting the Windsor look, naturally made from Pearson & Foster cloth, because like I said, he's affiliated with them, Gill believed that he looked prosperous and dashing. So Live and Let Die, 1973. Prince Rainier of Monaco was so impressed by the suits made by Cyril Castell, his Roger Moore's tailor, that he deserted the Italian who usually dresses him in 1963. Castell's clients, almost all of them, preferred lighter weight materials, and it was very unusual for him to make something like a 3-piece suit, so they're very minimal. The tailor himself tended towards narrower lapels on a lounge suit with a moderately suppressed waist and natural shoulders with minimal padding. Trousers were almost all made with plain bottoms and narrow raising on the side seams. Plain fronted, pleatless trousers, but if they're not asking for pleats, that's definitely a type of client who wants something that's a lot more minimal, and that's what he's catering to. When Roger Moore took over, he naturally wanted his tailor to make him the suits, so the baton was passed to Cyril Castell. He and Anthony Sinclair were actually very good friends, however, compared to Sinclair and Major, who had that whole fight, if you remember. He and Anthony Sinclair were very good friends, and Cyril Castell had the graciousness to talk to my father about it. My father being Natalie Watson, the person who's talking about this. As Natalie Watson explains, when Roger Moore took over, he naturally wanted his tailor to make the suits, and so the baton was passed to Cyril Castell. He and Anthony Sinclair were very good friends, and Cyril Castell had the graciousness to chat with my father about it. My father told him, "I've had a fair crack at the whip, and now it's your turn." Is that where the term whippersnapper comes from? If it is because of quotes like this, that would be so hilarious. Is that why all the old people are always like, "I've had a fair crack at the whip, now it's your turn"?
Whippersnapper.
Castell would also continue to make things for the man with the golden gun. Moore's dinner jacket also included 6 mother-of-pearl buttons, as well as a slanted jet pocket with a cocktail cuff. This particular jacket cuff was one of Castell's particular signatures that he included on some of his tailored suits, which Jeremy Hackett noted, "This stylish affectation has roots in military uniforms and was made more fashionable in the late 1950s and early 1960s by the smart tailors of the time." And if you remember, James Bond has a naval background, so the military suiting is very relevant to him. They also included some costume quips in the script as well. He has a magnetic watch that can be used for a variety of things, but the most notable is the fact that he can unzip women's zipper dresses with it. In the script, Bond's hand passes close to the zipper top. Without touching it, the top suddenly snaps straight out. Holding his hand some distance from her back, he lowers it, unzipping her dress. And in the script it says 28, close on the 2 of them. The girl moans as the zipper is heard sliding down. Girl, such a delicate touch. Bond, sheer magnetism. Like literal magnetism. The puns in this. The Navy Chesterfield overcoat that Bond wears at the airport is particularly celebrated by many Bond fans as one of Moore's more notable and stylish tailored outfits because it is just super iconic. This is also true because when being asked which of Moore's outfits he liked the most, Del Smith replied that this was the one. The coat is a double-breasted black velvet collar with wide peak lapels with a deep back vent. The tie is navy silk and has white and red diagonal stripes, and it has been identified by Spazer and Christopher Laverty as being a Royal Navy regimental tie, in keeping with Bond's history, as we said before, commander in the Royal Navy. And it also enhances Bond's Britishness while visiting New York given the Union Jack colorings, because he is British. From one of his other tailors, Harris, he said, "I never follow high fashion, even if the character is supposed to be a rich, fashionable woman, because styles date so quickly, and for contemporary clothes, the designer considered the length of the skirt hem to be the greatest problem," end quote. Which is very true, because if you think about it, women's skirt hems always are changing, and like a variety of skirt hems are made available, because long skirts, of course, in the 1800s used to be the only thing you could wear, but then in the 1920s, women were wearing flapper dresses, which were shorter skirts that were around their knee length. I don't remember, to be honest, the exact length. But then when it came to the 60s, people were wearing mini skirts, as made popular and notable by Twiggy. And now we just have all kinds of lengths of skirt. But some things may be more in fashion rather than others, because things are always changing. We always have trends that come around, and now we even have micro trends in fashion, which I think are not great for fashion. It's very unsustainable. In the film, Solitaire wears a modest high-necked full-sleeved long gown. That is reminiscent of a Turkish kaftan, and it is made from a crushed velvet in a ruby red color. Solitaire is one of the Bond girls. Solitaire's final costume is designed to reflect that the character is to be part of a sacrificial ritual and is understood to be Harris's favorite costume in the film. Back to Roger Moore. Mr. Moore always looks like a proper English gent, and he acquires a touch of irony. He's not quite yet 007, but he's a pretty good 008, meaning that in people's perception, Sean Connery is the only 007 that ever existed. Roger Moore is not quite the same, but he's way better than that George Lazenby guy. So, and like I said, I feel like it's very hard to change a fan base's perception of someone when you're bringing in another character when they've gotten so used to one person, and people are pretty resistant to change. But now that we've gone through like more than 4 different men in the role of James Bond, I think people have just kind of come to accept whoever walks into the role now a little bit more easily than before, because we almost expect that there will be a change in character if the Bond series continues to go on for another 10 years, because the same actor can't really do that. Not in the history of the Bond films. The Man with the Golden Gun, 1974. In the novel, the explicitly homosexual Scaramanga is described in a Secret Service file as being 6 foot 5 feet, slim and fit, with a gaunt and somber face that has light brown eyes and reddish hair with long sideburns. Except for the hair, Christopher Lee fits Fleming's physical description of Scaramanga well, who's the villain, although the script and film omits the homosexual characterization. Which is interesting, given that the film did not want to portray a homosexual character. And I don't know if it had something to do with homophobia at the time. One of the Bond girls, Goodnight, asks Bond what she should wear to dinner, to which he replies, "Something that's tight in all the right places. Not too many buttons. How convenient." Goodnight is later described as being perfumed in Chanel No. 5, which is interesting given that you can't really smell the perfume in a movie. After this film, Moore had actually become a UK tax exile, so he actually requests that his Italian tailor of Angelo Roma, remember he had 3 tailors, make his suits for The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker so that he could avoid going to London for fittings. And it's the first time in Eon Productions franchise that Bond wears an Italian tailored suit, which is I don't know if I really like that, because, you know, up to this point, he had only been wearing, like, English style suits. I suppose it makes sense. There's states here in the US where you get taxed a lot more than other states. And so sometimes it's better to retire in those states. In fact, I actually know someone who's side tangent. I'm going on a side tangent here. But I actually know someone who has just bought land and is building their house in another state different from the one that they're working in that's right next door, just across the border, and is a half-hour drive because they couldn't find any land that was within their budget. And it was just like crazy because all the land here is 6 figures plus for a couple acres. Housing prices are crazy. Back to Bond. Flusser explains Angelo's shoulders are slightly wider and more sloped, Angelo the tailor. Clients for him also included Frank Sinatra, Tony Curtis, and Telly Savalas. I don't know who the other 2 are, but Frank Sinatra is a big client. And Vitucci negotiated licenses to sell his suits in England, the United States, and Japan. Once again, the United States and Japan are huge fans of the Bond franchise. Vitucci widened the already wide lapels that Moore previously wore, and he also widened the flared trouser legs for an updated look. The single-breasted jackets have a lean chest and suppressing waist, and normally have a 2-button fastening, a welt pocket, and double vents. The high-rise trousers have a flat front. And like I said, Roger Moore is very adventurous with his fashion, and he's way more avant-garde than every other person in the Bond franchise playing him. And he actually started wearing safari sports jackets. It has wide lapels with fish mouth, notch, and swelled edges. Baser argues that the sports jacket has an unusual cut. The front of the jacket is typically cut away and thus curved below the button at the waist. On this jacket, the edges of the foreparts are straight and have only a small curve in the corner. The edges, however, are slightly angled apart for a more dynamic look than from a straight front would provide. I imagine what he's saying is something like this blazer jacket, where it's like you can see how the corners are like curved away. Ronald Patterson, the Scottish-born fashion designer who was once referred to as the couturier's Sean Connery, on a trip to America in 1964 due to his dark and handsome looks, as it's described in my sources here, was employed on The Spy Who Loved Me as the costume designer, although he is credited in the film as a fashion consultant. Patterson was recognized for his clothes that were flattering and colorful and often presented in unpredictable ways. Patterson was also renowned for his skillful handling of heavyweight fabrics, such as tweed. His mentor was actually Elsa Schiaparelli, who, if you don't know, Schiaparelli is one of the big names in high fashion, who introduced him to the Paris couture scene. The Spy Who Loved Me, 1977. Following the credits, Bond wears a Royal Navy commander's dress uniform and later a Royal Navy greatcoat over the top of the uniform in these scenes. And they were both made from dark navy wool. Similar to Connery's uniform worn in You Only Live Twice, Moore's is cut in a traditional English military style with straight shoulders, rope sleeve heads, and clean chest and suppressed waist. I feel like that's the only way they could go with it. If it was an Italian military style, I think the viewers would be kind of disappointed because Bond is a British man. So it has to be, even though his suits are Italian, or were Italian. The greatcoat is cut in the traditional English military style from Melton cloth and is double-breasted, including the 10 gilt buttons, also with the crown and anchor motifs with the dress jacket. It has a wide Napoleon collar. Bond's commander rank insignia is stitched on the epaulets in gold embroidery in the gold oak leaves on the black peak. Later on, Bond wears a didasha, and the didasha is a long fitted tunic with a 2-button fastening on the band collar, and this is when he goes to Egypt and starts wearing traditional Arab clothing. Over it, he wears an open biche cloak made from a beige silk. The biche is often worn for prestige by royals or important figures and on special occasions. Actually, I looked it up again and it's pronounced biche. Given like his impeccable love for clothing and tailoring and appreciation for quality, that is actually written into the script in a funny way too. I just love how James Bond is such a fashionable man who appreciates good tailoring, and that is actually worked into the script. It says, Bond crouches on the roof above him, reaches down and grasps the sleeve of Sandor's jacket. Bond questions where Fakesh is. Sandor's fingers slip from the guttering. Now he is held only by Bond's grasp of his sleeve. He looks up at Bond imploringly. The sleeve starts to rip away from the jacket at the shoulder. Bond, your life is hanging by a thread. Come on, where is he? Sandor, gasping.
Pyramids! The pyramids!
The sleeves rips away from the jacket and Sandor, with a scream of fear, falls into space. Bond looks at the empty sleeve he is still holding. Then, with a shrug, he tosses it over the edge of the roof. Bond, not a tailor I'd recommend. Interestingly enough, this tailoring quip was actually a reference to Alfred Hitchcock's Saboteur movie in 1942. This whole scene was omitted from the film, unfortunately. During the battle scenes at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, Bond wears what is termed as naval battle dress, a style that was developed in 1943 during World War II and has since become obsolete. In the Mujaba Club, the script directs that Anya, one of the Bond girls, is looking extravagantly feminine in a beautiful low-cut evening dress and a cross strap that is adorned with translucent Swarovski crystals that continue over the bodice. Like, that's big bucks there. Anya's jewelry matches the Swarovski crystal that is on her gown, and the earrings, necklace, and bracelet are also colored in black and clear diamante crystals. When Bond and Anya report to the combined base of MI6 and KGB, Anya wears the first of 2 off-white silk sheath wrap dresses. This is reflective of Patterson's Nassau ensemble created for his spring collection in 1964. He basically borrowed inspiration. That included a wraparound skirt inspired by his mentor Schiaparelli's development of the wrap dress in the 1930s. After wearing a similar wrap dress on the train bound for Sardinia, Anya changes into a floor-length pale pink nightgown made of silk. The color has been selected to complement Bond's attire in the scene in order to visually demonstrate both their mutual collaboration as well as their progressing relationship. In the script, it suggests that Anya wears a chiffon nightgown in the scene. However, the nightgown was made from sheer silk instead. This is perhaps due to the role the fabric would take later in the scene when it is suggested that the hem could be used as a bandage for Bond's wound because it's kind of a gauzy fabric. On Anya discovering that Bond was directly involved in the death of her lover, Sergei Barsov, aka Michael Billington, the character wears a khaki-colored sheer silk dress that works to foreground 1970s fashion. The color is also reflective of her allegiance to the KGB and Russia rather than to Bond in the scene, because this khaki color is much more militaristic and KGB-like. Interestingly, the Bond villain, Stromberg, doesn't actually wear an explicit Mao or Nehru tunic, suit, because generally they take the form of an unstructured tunic made from heavy silk in keeping with the assumed foreignness, but it is actually a tunic with a V-neck collar with no visible front or back fastenings, which is very different. There's always exceptions to the rule. Moonraker, 1979. Originally, the film that was due to follow The Spy Who Loved Me was For Your Eyes Only. However, owing to the popularity of Star Wars in 1977 and Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977, science fiction really took off, so the producers were like, hey, we should capitalize on this hype. So Broccoli, the producer, decided to adapt Moonraker to a title that's reflecting more of a science fiction theme. As Broccoli noted, putting James Bond into orbit brought Ian Fleming into the space age, end quote. I mean, it makes sense. You gotta make sure the timing is right, and I'm pretty sure this is probably what also helped the film too, is the craze. Like with the British release of the James Bond paraphernalia, that did not go well for them because they released it like 8 months after the boom. So timing really is everything. In Moonraker, and after Bond and Dr. Goodhead, aka Lois Chiles, managed to escape from Jaws, the script has more fashion tailoring quips in it. After a moment, Holly sees that Bond is sitting 3 or 4 feet away, his head bowed, a hand held to the torn lapel of his tattered dinner jacket as if he was feeling for a broken rib. He winces in pain. Holly: James, have you broken something? Bond looks at his lapel. Bond: only my tailor's heart. On being sent to the Amazon River, the script directs that Bond wears a safari suit, another fashion abomination once again, in Fontry's costume concept titled Saharian B. The number 10 written on it in his concept sketch denotes that the number of versions that the designer had to sketch before coming to this realized idea, which is crazy. That's a lot. It is worth noting that in the posters designed for Moonraker by Daniel Gozi, Bond is depicted as wearing a silver foil spacesuit rather than the yellow version designed for the final film. The novel's villain, Sir Hugo Drax, was updated in the film. So basically, they updated the guy from being a Nazi who's bent on nuclear rockets to a rich guy who still creates rockets, basically, space shuttles, but for NASA, and isn't an evil Nazi. It is actually cut similar in shape to a Mao jacket, but it has a distinctive and way more westernized detail to it. Drax explains to Bond that the fictional Orchidea nigra, black orchid, has pollen which causes sterility in men. Therefore, it is made implicit in Moonraker that Drax, the villain, is sexually impotent. This is in keeping with Drax's Nazism, which he seeks to create a master race of perfect physical specimens, although he's not included in the procreation process, which is strange. It's like, I'm gonna breed the perfect specimens, but I can't myself reproduce. Ironic. And the portrayal of the majority of the villains in Fleming's novels, who, with the exception of Emilio Largo, are also depicted as physically grotesque and either homosexual, asexual, or impotent. Which is interesting that they would align homosexuality, asexuality, or impotence as something bad, and also that villains would have to be impotent sexually and also very ugly, and that the heroes have to be beautiful and sexually charged, as depicted with Bond and the Bond girls, the contrast of good and bad. In Venice, Holly wears a coffee-colored silk chiffon A-line dress cut in a barrel silhouette that is hemmed at the knee. The dress is cinched at the waist with a black velvet belt, and the dress was actually sourced from Givenchy in Paris. In the hotel room scenes, Bond discovers that Holly works as an agent on behalf of the CIA through her gadgets, including a Christian Dior perfume that actually works as a flamethrower, which it makes sense, you know? There's alcohol in the perfume, but the fact that it's a flamethrower is kind of silly. But it's James Bond, in which one of the quips in the script was, "A trifle overpowering, your scent." Yeah, overpowering indeed if someone's throwing a flamethrower at you. In addition to, Holly's white silk gown was actually inspired by Marilyn Monroe in The 7-Year Itch. For Roger Moore's 1980s Bond films, he recommended another one of his personal tailors, Douglas Hayward, to create his suits. Hayward made Moore's suits for the last 3 Bond films, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, and A View to Kill. Hayward came to develop a close friendship, and Moore was later quoted in Hayward's obituary. "Doug was among the 5 best tailors in London, though I have no idea who the other 4 were. For me, he was the one and only tailor," which is kind of ironic considering that he did actually have other tailors like Cyril Castle and Angelo Vittucci. Hayward's daughter, Polly, explained that the pair were very close. "My father knew Roger Moore before he was famous, and he helped him by making him look good for auditions auditions and things. Hayward's former wife outlines how Hayward was the funniest man I have ever met. When he was at school, Hayward describes that he wasn't going to do a blue-collar job. He didn't want to get his hands dirty. His mother worked in a bullet factory during World War II, and his father used to clean the boilers in the BBC. He didn't want to do that, so he wanted a clean job. Hence, that's why he became a tailor. Hayward was initially employed by the firm Montague Burton. Robert reviews that due to Hayward's working class accent, he had a Cockney accent. It was requested that they work in the back and work on his act. And I don't think Cockney accents are that bad. I mean, I suppose it makes you sound hickish, but it makes you probably more humble. Hayward himself admitted, "I suppose women talk to their hairdresser and men talk to their tailor. If you give them the chance at all, their worries will come flying out." Which I think is a very interesting metaphor. Smith concurs in noting in terms of structure, Hayward really knew how to put a jacket together. His suits were British with an Italian influence, and they were more relaxed in the more militant Savile Row style. They were very distinctive. In terms of the outward appearance of a Hayward suit, the jackets would include soft shoulders with a structured line. Not too much of a roped sleeve head because of the shoulders. This gives the Hayward suit a softer, more elegant silhouette. The jacket always had a side vent and 3 or 4 button cuffs. One of his signatures was to include frog mouth or drop cross pockets in the trousers. There were also internal parts of the suit that would be signature Hayward that can't be seen. Another really distinctive element of a Hayward suit is that they were tailored with lightweight cloth, which would explain why Roger Moore liked Hayward's style of tailoring, because as described in the first tailor's description of how he made his suits, Cyril Castle, he also made things very minimalist with a lightweight fabric and minimal pleating on the trousers, if none, and so does Hayward. He uses a lightweight fabric. As Smith explains, during the 1960s, the average weight for a suit would be 14 ounces and a more lightweight suit would be 11 or 12 ounces. Smith reveals that Hayward particularly loved using tweeds and that herringbone tweed was one of the most popular choices with clients in particular. Owing to this, James Coburn referred to Hayward as the rodent of tweed. A two-piece bespoke Hayward suit would cost around 250 pounds towards the end of the 1960s, 700 pounds by the mid-1980s, and by the late 1990s, 2,750 pounds. It more than doubled every single decade. In fact, it seems like it tripled, which really goes to show how much talent this man has, or at least his clients. By the way of comparison, a Savile Row two-piece suit in the 1990s would cost an average of 3,500 pounds. So still significantly more, but his things are probably still cost competitive enough that despite the expensive price, you're still saving like almost 800 pounds. Hayward's principle towards tailoring Moore's Bond suits was, quote, "Keep them as classic as possible. I believe people will be watching Bond films in 20 years' time. Keep noticeable details, such as turn-back cuffs, to a minimum. I have always borne that in mind when making clothes for films that I don't think I've ever done a work for a film that I am now embarrassed by," end quote. Robert argues he revolutionized British tailoring, which was very stuffy, and owing to the combined British and Italian influence evident in his suits, Hayward added something to British tailoring that wasn't there before. I think there was a lot of his success due to that, because he could make everyone look very romantic with it. Hayward is also credited for working with Ralph Lauren and establishing their purple label in 1995. Le Carre acknowledged Hayward as being the inspiration behind the lead character, Harry Pendel, in his novel The Tailor of Panama. And this is very interesting because it goes back to that quote that Hayward said earlier, where women go to their hairdressers to talk and men go to their tailors to talk, and listen to them well enough, everything comes flying out. Because in his novel The Tailor of Panama, which Hayward's daughter explains, on the grounds that you hear all sorts of things while you're measuring someone's inner leg, it's the perfect spy scenario. Furthermore, many of Hayward's later staff would go on to develop their careers working for tailors based on Savile Row, such as Smith, who went to work for Kilgore and eventually was due to set up his own tailoring firm. Smith continued to follow what he had learned there with soft, structured shoulders, and thus his legacy has filtered into the tailoring of Savile Row's suits today. Hayward himself would have found this very ironic because he was originally turned away from Savile Row firms due to his Cockney accent starting out as a tailor. For Your Eyes Only, 1981. If you're enjoying this video, please give this video a like, because likes are free. This shows the algorithm that this is a video that should be shared with more people. And subscribe because you don't want to miss the things we do on this channel related to couture, style, and analysis. If you subscribe, you'll get your CSA PSA. If we can get to 1,000 subscribers, I'll be letting my subscribers pick the next video topic we do on this channel related to fashion. And this is just my way of giving back, and this is my way of thanking you all for supporting supporting this channel. In his second three-piece suit in the movie, this time it was tailored from a navy worsted flannel. The jacket has 2 rather than 3 button fastenings, a frog mouth pocket, and one of the trousers, which if you remember, that's one of the things that's signature to Hayward's tailoring. Johnson, one of the Bond girls, cast in the role due to her being a professional skater. She always had costumes made by someone else who did skating competition dresses. In London, she said that they took them to Berman's at Nathan's, a place that had never done a skating dress. It's particular because the dress has to flow in a particular way, and I remember thinking this is not going to work. These people have never done a skating dress, but they made a beautiful dress, and I still have it. End quote. The dress that she's talking about is the ice skating dress that Phoebe wears in her first scenes. Octopussy, 1983. Octopussy, 1983. Porteous, one of the costume designers, has explained how different it was to design costumes for a Bond film. Doing a James Bond film, which has such a reputation for elegance and glamour, everyone's beautiful and without a crease. It does mean that you approach it in a different way. It's a whole new area to work in. Octopussy was an unbelievably happy film, and there was no trouble in it. The designer spent between 12 and 14 weeks preparing for the film. Part of Porteous's inspiration behind Octopussy designs came from buying many books on India. The designer assisted in the fabric selection, explaining it's a question of picking beautiful fabrics and putting him in them. He's a good clothes horse, the least trouble of anyone, she said. In India, one of the things Bond wears is a shirt with cuffs that are fastened with regular onyx cufflinks. And during the chase through the streets of Udaipur, auto rickshaw, tuk-tuk, the chest of his dinner jacket is pierced with a knife blade and embedded itself into a wad of bills in his inner pocket jacket. He pulls the knife out and throws the knife and bills away. During the backgammon game, Gobinda the villain wears one of his first Eastern influenced costumes, namely a Mao tunic. Once again, we see this recurrence of the Bond villain stereotype of wearing the Mao or the Nehru suits. And then returning to India, Gobinda has changed into a brown Nehru suit. Octopussy, the lead Bond girl, is first viewed wearing her first main costumes in the film in a floor-length unlined sheer satin ivory dressing gown. It has a customized orange and blue octopus on the back, designed by Piotrowski, which was hand-painted by a local Udaipur artist straight into the plain silk. Porteous explained that she visited Southall, London, the most incredible place, she said, to source fabrics for Indian costumes. I found all my Indian jewelry there, wonderful silks and things. Porteous particularly enjoyed designing the Indian costumes. I can't tell you what fun it's been. Everywhere there's cleavage and legs to show off, and Indian fabrics are just wonderful. That's just very funny. She would write in her way. Everywhere it's been fun. There's cleavage and legs to show off. Ooh la la. A View to Kill, 1985. And one of the most distinctive costumes in A View to Kill is afforded to Mayday, aka Grace Jones, who is the bad Bond girl. Jones developed a passion for crochet and sewing her own wardrobe from an early age and became inspired by the fashion choices of the Supremes, recreating versions of their style by sewing in her mother's basement, using the same Butterick and Vogue patterns that they would use when they started and had no money. I would cut up old dresses and make new ones from the material. There are consistent reports that Jones was approached for the role of Octopussy. However, according to Jones, there was some anxiety about having a black woman as a villain. A Bond movie is, for all the appearance of sex and violence, a fundamentally very conservative franchise. Well, maybe very conservative in their views, political views of race and gender, but not for sex and violence at all, and not in terms of their financial choices at all. Jones was later offered the part of Mayday and agreed owing to a regret of turning down the role of Zora in Blade Runner. For May's costumes, Jones was heavily involved in the design stage of the process, and even more so than previous women cast into her role of the Bond films. Quote, I knew what I wanted, how I was going to look as a Bond girl. I looked at Disney colors because I figured being a Bond girl was like being in a cartoon. I took in tips I had learned from Issei Miyake and Kenzo, and had direct input from other designers who became a friend, Azadine Alaya. End quote. As Porteous says, all her costumes were extraordinary because she's a very extraordinary woman. A lot of them were based on her own sort of clothes, and there's no way in the world you can force her into something she doesn't like because she has very, very strong views on how she should look. So you've got to work very closely with her. This is kind of in direct contrast to one of the other designers we talked about, where he said that he would take into account things you do not like, but ultimately it's not up to the actress to have liberties over what she wants to wear. The designer has most of the say. Here she has a lot more say. In the first and only time in a Bond film to date, Mayday has sexual intercourse with Bond, who does not intend to or succeed in even ideologically realigning her, as with Pussy Galore, into changing her from a lesbian to straight, for example, but rather to offer a plausible explanation as to why he was not in his suite. So now we move into the era of Timothy Dalton, The Living Daylights, 1987. According to Glenn, Dalton's engagement with the costumes began in the very first wardrobe consultation, and when Bond wasn't wearing the obligatory tux, Dalton wanted a more casual look, perhaps more in keeping with the times, specifically requesting a leather jacket. This is very radical for the times because other than Moore's safari suits, there's really been no one who wanted to wear something so casual, and in Sean Connery's times, no one would even dare to wear anything besides a suit. I mean, that's all Sean Connery really wore was suits. And now we've seen there's like a loosening of like the kinds of clothes that we see James Bond can wear. First with more like safari suits, and now he wants to wear a leather jacket, Timothy Dalton does. I'll be coming out with part 3 hopefully soon. Subscribe and like so you don't miss the things we do on this channel, especially that part 3. Give this video a like. I do these videos in my spare time. I would appreciate it so that the algorithm can spread this a little bit more and it shows that these videos are interesting. Subscribe so you don't miss your CSA PSA couture style and analysis. My name is Mimi and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!